My husband drained my account. During chemo, he didn't expect I'd fight back. My name is Emma Collins, I'm 42, and this is my story. The chemo lounge had a particular smell, antiseptic mixed with the faint, sweet scent of the ginger candies the nurses handed out to fight the nausea. I sat in the worn beige recliner, a thin blanket over my legs, watching the clear liquid drip from the IV bag into my arm. It was my third round. By now, the routine was numbingly familiar. The prick of the needle, the slow-building coldness in my veins, the metallic taste in my mouth. My husband Ethan wasn't there. He'd stopped coming a few weeks ago. Too draining, he'd said. I didn't have the energy to argue. Usually, during these hours, I would close my eyes and try to float away, thinking of nothing. But that day, a strange, sharp anxiety cut through the fog. It was an itch under my skin, a voice in my head telling me to do something, anything, other than just sit there. My phone was on the small table next to me. I reached for it with a trembling hand, my fingers feeling weak and clumsy. I never checked my banking app during treatments. I was too tired, too sick, too focused on just getting through the next minute. But that day, I opened it. The screen lit up with the familiar logo of my bank. I tapped in my passcode, my thumbprint not working on my dry, cracked skin. The main page loaded, showing the balance of my personal savings account. My heart didn't just drop. It stopped cold. The number I expected to see, the number that had been my safety net, my mother's inheritance carefully preserved for my future, was gone. Not just low, gone, but before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. My breath caught in my throat. I scrolled down, my eyes darting frantically over the recent transactions. There were 3 massive transfers, all made within the last month. One for $50,000, another for $85,000. And the last one, the one that stole the air from my lungs, was for $346,120. My entire inheritance. Every last cent. And next to each transfer, the recipient's name stared back at me from the screen. A digital accusation. Allison Monroe. Allison, the wellness consultant Ethan had hired to help me through my treatment. The woman who brought me herbal tea and spoke in soft, calming tones about positive energy. The woman my husband had insisted would be my rock when he couldn't be. In that sterile, quiet room, surrounded by the beeping of machines and the gentle murmur of nurses, the truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. While I was sitting in this very chair, fighting for my life, my husband wasn't just absent. He was actively dismantling my life, stealing my security, and handing it over to another woman. The betrayal was so absolute, so cold, it burned away the sickness and the exhaustion. In their place, something new and hard began to form. Staring at the digital theft on my phone screen, my mind didn't just see the recent past. It scrolled back through our entire 15 years together. It was like watching a movie where you finally understand the twist at the end, and suddenly, every scene that came before takes on a new, sinister meaning. Our relationship had been built on a narrative I co-authored, one where Ethan was the brilliant, passionate dreamer, and I was the steady, supportive partner who helped make those dreams possible. I'd always thought of my role as noble, as the bedrock of our partnership. Now I saw it for what it was. I wasn't the bedrock. I was the quarry, and he had been mining me for resources since the day we met. I remembered one of our first big projects together, his dream to open a craft brewery. It was all he could talk about for a solid year. He'd drag me to warehouses, his eyes alight with vision, saying, "Imagine it, Em. Big steel vats right there, a long wooden bar here, people laughing and drinking something we made." His passion was infectious, and I got swept up in it. I saw the dream through his eyes. But I was also the one who saw the reality. While he was tasting hops and designing logos, I was spending my nights and weekends hunched over spreadsheets, figuring out how we could possibly afford it. I took on extra freelance bookkeeping jobs, fueling myself with coffee and the sheer will to give him this thing he wanted so badly. The sleep deprivation was a constant hum beneath the surface of my days, but I told myself it was worth it. When the bank initially rejected our loan application, he was ready to give up. He sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, a picture of defeat. "It's impossible," he'd mumbled. I refused to let him fail. I spent 2 straight weeks reworking our entire financial portfolio, creating a 50-page business plan so detailed and airtight they couldn't possibly say no. I found a way. I always found a way. The brewery was a success for a while. The launch party was one of the happiest nights of my life. Ethan stood on a small stage, a microphone in his hand, and toasted me. "To my amazing wife, Emma," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. She is the brains and the heart behind all of this. I'm just the guy who likes beer. Everyone cheered, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. We were a team. We had built this together, but Ethan was a creator, not a manager. He loved the romance of invention, but he hated the mundane reality of running a business. The payroll, the inventory, the scheduling. Those tasks naturally fell to me. After my full day at the accounting firm, I'd drive to the brewery and spend another 5 hours managing the books. The business started to struggle under the weight of his creative whims and financial mismanagement. He wanted to buy expensive new equipment we couldn't afford and host free events that bled us dry. When I tried to talk to him about budgets and profit margins, his eyes would glaze over. "Don't suffocate the dream with numbers, Em," he'd say. The dream finally died 2 years in, buried under a mountain of debt. The day we signed the papers to sell, he was heartbroken. I held him as he cried, telling him how proud I was that he'd even tried. I never once said, "I told you so." I never mentioned the tens of thousands of dollars of my own savings that had vanished along with his dream. Instead, I quietly consolidated the debt into my name, protecting his credit score, and picked up even more freelance work to pay it off. He recovered quickly, his mind already buzzing with the next big idea. I was left to clean up the wreckage, smiling and telling everyone he was a resilient genius. It was the same when his father fell ill. We were at his parents' house for Sunday dinner when his mom pulled me aside in the kitchen, her face creased with worry. She showed me a stack of medical bills, her hands trembling. "We can't pay these, Emma. We just can't." Ethan was in the other room, laughing with his dad, oblivious. He couldn't handle things like this. The ugliness of sickness, the stress of money. It fell to me. I spent the next month on the phone with insurance companies, with hospital administrators, arguing, negotiating, pleading. I became an expert in billing codes and coverage gaps. Ethan would ask for updates and I would give him the simplified version, shielding him from the stressful details. "I'm handling it," I'd say. When I realized there was a shortfall of nearly $60,000 that the insurance simply wouldn't cover, the solution was obvious. It had to be me. I went to my financial advisor, a kind man who had helped me set up my 401k when I was just 24. He looked at me over his glasses, his expression grave. "Emma, this is your retirement. Are you sure about this?" I remember the knot in my stomach as I signed the papers for the loan against my future. But when I told Ethan I'd found the money, the relief that washed over his face felt like its own reward. "You're a lifesaver, Em. My family's angel." He never asked for the details. He didn't want to know. He just wanted the problem to be gone. The loan was just another silent debt I carried for the both of us. So, when the doctor gave me my own diagnosis, it felt like the world was turning upside down. For the first time, I was the one in crisis. I was the one who was fragile. And initially, Ethan stepped into the role of caregiver with a scripted perfection. He was the one who held me in the sterile white doctor's office as the word malignant hung in the air. He was the one who drove us home, one hand on the steering wheel, the other holding mine in a white-knuckled grip. "We're going to fight this," he said, his voice a raw, determined whisper. "We." The word was a comfort, a promise that I wasn't alone. The first couple of months were a blur of appointments, tests, and fear. Ethan was my shadow, my scheduler, my champion. He created a binder with all my medical records, color-coded and organized. He researched anti-cancer diets and filled our fridge with kale and turmeric. He would sit beside me during the first chemo infusions, a stoic, handsome presence in a room filled with sickness and fear. He'd read to me from novels, his voice a steady drone that cut through my nausea. He'd bring me warm blankets from home and hold a cup of water to my lips when I was too weak to lift it myself. Our friends and family were in awe. "Ethan is a saint," my own sister told me over the phone. "You're so lucky to have him." And I believed it. I clung to his strength because I had none of my own left. I had spent a decade and a half being his safety net, and now I was finally letting myself fall, trusting he would catch me. The change when it came was gradual, a slow erosion rather than a sudden crack. It started with him spending more time on his phone during my treatments, a frown of concentration on his face as he texted. "Just work stuff," he'd mutter if I asked. Then he began taking important calls in the hallway, his voice a low, urgent murmur that I couldn't quite hear. The first time he said he couldn't come with me to chemo, his excuse was plausible. A last-minute meeting he couldn't get out of. "I feel terrible about it, Em. You'll be okay, right?" I assured him I would, hiding my disappointment. I didn't want to be a burden. But one missed appointment became a pattern. The excuses became flimsier. He was tired. He had a headache. He felt a cold coming on. The truth was simple. My illness was a drain. It was hard work. It was not romantic or inspiring anymore. It was just a grim, ugly slog. And Ethan had never been good with the slog. He was a man built for grand beginnings, not for the difficult, grinding middle. And my cancer was a very, very difficult middle. The man who had once toasted me as the heart of his dream now couldn't even stand to sit with me while I fought for my life. The team was officially disbanded. I just hadn't been sent the memo yet. The physical abandonment at the hospital was one thing, but the emotional abandonment at home was a creeping poison. Our house, once a place of comfort and shared life, began to feel like a cold, empty museum of a marriage that used to exist. The silence was the loudest thing in it. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that followed me from room to room. Ethan retreated into his office, the door always closed. I would be on the couch, wrapped in blankets and shivering with chills from the chemo, and I could hear him on the phone in his office, laughing. It was a bright, genuine laugh, the one I used to love. But it wasn't for me anymore. It felt like it was coming from a different world, a world I was no longer a part of. Our conversations, when we had them, became minefields of resentment and misunderstanding. I tried early on to explain what I was feeling. One evening, I found him in the kitchen making himself a sandwich. I was feeling particularly raw and lonely. "Ethan," I started, my voice trembling slightly. "I feel so alone in this." He didn't even look up from spreading mustard on his bread. He just sighed, a long put-upon sound. "Emma, what do you want me to do?" "I'm here, aren't I? The house is clean, the bills are paid. I can't get the chemo for you." "I'm doing the best I can." "I don't need you to do anything," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "I just need you to be here, with me, to talk to me." He finally looked at me, and his expression wasn't one of compassion, but of pure exasperation. "Everything is always about the cancer," he said, his voice sharp. "We can't have one normal conversation anymore. It's draining, Emma. Do you have any idea how draining it is to live with this day in and day out?" The cruelty of his words knocked the air out of me. He was drained? What did he think I was? It was the ultimate selfishness, reframing my life-threatening illness as a burden on him. I had no response. I just turned and walked back to the couch, the gulf between us wider and deeper than ever. I learned my lesson. I stopped talking about how I felt. I stopped asking for comfort. I swallowed my fear and my loneliness and pretended to be fine, because my real, raw pain was an inconvenience to him. The ultimate test of this new, terrifying dynamic came the day I decided to shave my head. My hair, which had been one of the few things that still made me feel like myself, was now my enemy. It clogged the shower drain. It covered my pillows in a dark, depressing shroud. Every time I brushed it, my hands would be full of strands, a tangible symbol of how my body was failing. I couldn't stand the slow, passive loss anymore. I needed to do something proactive, to take back a tiny sliver of control. I practiced the conversation in my head all morning. I wanted to frame it in a way that wouldn't make him feel pressured or burdened. I found him in the living room reading. I sat down hesitantly on the other end of the couch. "Hey," I said softly. "So, my hair is getting pretty bad. I think I want to just shave it off today. Get it over with." He lowered his book and looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in what felt like weeks. There was no warmth in his eyes, only a kind of clinical assessment. "Are you sure you want to do that?" he asked. "You'll look sick." "I am sick, Ethan," I said, my voice cracking. "That's the point. I want to stop pretending, but I'm scared. I don't want to go by myself. I was hoping you'd come with me. Just to hold my hand," he recoiled. It wasn't a big movement, just a slight shifting of his body away from me, but it felt like a shove. He closed his book and placed it carefully on the coffee table, lining it up with the edge. He was avoiding my eyes. "I can't," he said, the words clipped and final. "I just can't, Emma. I can't handle seeing you like that. It would be too much for me." The phrase hung in the air between us. Too much for me. It was the anthem of his abandonment. My suffering was valid only in how it affected him. My appearance, my fight for life, it was all a performance, and he was a critic who found the show too distasteful to watch. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. What was the point? You can't shame someone into having a heart. I just nodded, a jerky, pathetic motion. "Okay," I whispered. "I understand." I drove myself to the salon. The world outside my car window seemed impossibly normal. People were jogging, walking their dogs, laughing. They were living in a world that hadn't been shattered by a diagnosis. A world where the person who vowed to love you in sickness and in health actually meant it. The salon was a small, quiet place called Serenity Cuts. The woman at the desk, Maria, had a kind, tired face. She took one look at my red-rimmed eyes and didn't ask any questions. She just led me to a private room in the back, away from the chatter and the mirrors of the main salon. She wrapped the cape around me, her movements gentle and practiced. "I had a sister who went through this," she said softly, her voice filled with a genuine empathy that felt like a glass of water in the desert. She said the worst part was losing her eyebrows. She smiled a little, a shared moment of gallows humor. And in that moment, I felt more connected to this complete stranger than I did to my own husband. She turned on the clippers, and the low buzz filled the small room. I closed my eyes. I couldn't bear to watch. I felt the vibration against my scalp, the strange sensation of the weight of my hair disappearing. With each pass of the clippers, I felt a piece of the old me falling away. When she was done, she turned them off. The silence was deafening. "You can open your eyes," Maria said gently. I took a deep breath and looked. The person staring back at me was a stranger. My head was pale and patchy, my eyes huge and dark in my gaunt face. I looked like a refugee, like a victim. I looked, as Ethan had so helpfully pointed out, sick. I touched my scalp, the soft, fuzzy stubble feeling alien under my fingertips. A sob escaped my lips, a raw animal sound of pure grief. Maria didn't try to offer platitudes. She just handed me a box of tissues and put a warm, steadying hand on my shoulder. She waited for the wave of tears to pass. "You know," she said after a while, her voice still soft, "my sister, she said that after she shaved her head, she felt free. She said it was like she was taking off a costume. Now everyone could see she was a warrior. A warrior." The word seemed so foreign. I felt like anything but Maria's kindness was a balm. She helped me choose a soft, patterned scarf from a collection she kept specifically for clients like me. She showed me how to tie it, her fingers nimble and sure. "There," she said, adjusting it gently. "Beautiful." I drove home in a daze, the warrior narrative fighting against the victim narrative in my head. The house was empty. Ethan's car was gone. A note was on the kitchen counter. "Went out with Mark. Be back late." He hadn't even had the decency to be there when I got home. He couldn't face the reality of what his wife had become. That night, he slept on the couch again. I lay in our king-sized bed, the space beside me cold and empty. I felt the smooth fabric of the scarf under my cheek. I had never felt so utterly, terrifyingly alone. I wasn't just fighting a disease anymore. I was fighting the ghost of a marriage. The ghost of a man I thought I knew, and I was losing. The arrival of Allison was presented not as a replacement for Ethan, but as a gift from him. He approached me about a week after the head-shaving incident, a period during which our house had settled into a state of silent, icy truce. He found me on the couch, where I spent most of my days, and knelt before me, taking my hands in his. The gesture was so theatrical, so unlike the cold distance he'd maintained, that I was immediately on guard. "Emma," he said, his voice oozing a practiced sincerity. "I need to apologize. I have been absent. I've been a terrible husband." He looked down at our joined hands, a portrait of shame. "I'm just not built for this. Seeing you in pain, it breaks me. I feel helpless, and I lash out, and that's not fair to you. You deserve so much better." This was a new tactic. In the past, he would have gotten defensive. This vulnerability was disarming, and I felt a flicker of the old hope. Maybe he understood. Maybe we could fix this. "But just because I'm weak," he continued, looking up at me with wide, earnest eyes, "doesn't mean you should suffer." So I did something. I found a professional. Her name is Allison Monroe, and she's a holistic wellness consultant. She helps people like you. She can manage your diet, help with meditation and mindfulness, be a positive presence. She can be the rock that I have failed to be. My first instinct was to say no. The idea of a stranger infiltrating our home, our lives, felt like a profound violation. It felt like he wasn't just outsourcing his duties as a husband. He was outsourcing his humanity. But then I looked around at the silent, empty house. I thought of the long, lonely days and the even longer nights. I was exhausted from trying to manage my own care, from begging for scraps of compassion from my husband. The idea of someone whose entire job it was to simply be kind to me was intoxicatingly appealing. Against my better judgment, I felt my defenses crumble under the weight of my own loneliness. "Okay," I heard myself say. "Okay, Ethan, if you think it will help." The relief on his face was immediate and profound. It wasn't the relief of a man who had found a solution for his wife's suffering. It was the relief of a man being granted parole. Allison arrived 2 days later, and she was exactly as polished and serene as her website had promised. She glided into our home with a bright, professional smile, carrying a basket of organic produce and aromatherapy oils. She spoke in a low, soothing voice, her words peppered with phrases like healing journey, positive energy, and mind-body connection. She was the physical embodiment of a wellness blog. In the beginning, her presence was a strange comfort. She was efficient and knowledgeable. She made foul-tasting green smoothies that she swore would boost my immune system. She taught me breathing exercises that helped quell the panic that sometimes rose in my chest. She was a buffer between me and the suffocating silence of the house. Ethan treated her like a visiting deity. He hung on her every word, his face a mask of rapt attention. Allison was just explaining the benefits of dandelion root tea, he'd announce, as if she had just unlocked the secrets of the universe. He was finally engaged with my illness, but only as a spectator. Allison was the star of the show. I was merely the set on which it was performed. The transition from caregiver to usurper was insidious. Allison's first move was to colonize the kitchen. "The energy in here is all wrong for healing," she declared one morning, her brow furrowed as she surveyed my countertops. Too much clutter, too many processed foods. Over the next few days, she systematically detoxed my pantry, throwing out my favorite snacks, my coffee, the pasta I sometimes craved. She replaced them with bags of quinoa, mysterious herbs, and jars of fermented vegetables. When I weakly protested, she gave me a pitying smile. "Emma, your body is a temple. We have to treat it as such." Ethan backed her up completely. "She knows what she's doing, Em. Just let her help." My own kitchen no longer felt like mine. It was Allison's sterile, holistic laboratory. Her control soon expanded beyond the kitchen. She began managing my schedule, answering my phone, and screening my visitors. A call from my sister was met with Allison's calm, firm voice. "Emma's energy is very low today. I think it's best if she rests. I'll let her know you called." Friends who wanted to drop by were told that I wasn't up for company. She was systematically cutting my tethers to the outside world, isolating me under the guise of protecting my health. I was becoming a prisoner in my own home, and my husband was paying for the guard. The moments that truly chilled me were the small, intimate ones. I would be lying in bed, and I'd hear her and Ethan talking in the living room. Their voices would be low, punctuated by shared laughter. They were building a rapport, a friendship, a life that existed entirely outside of my sick room. One afternoon, I came downstairs to get a glass of water and found them sitting close together on the couch, heads bent over his laptop. They were looking at travel websites. I saw pictures of the Italian countryside flash across the screen before Ethan quickly closed it. "Oh, Emma, you're up," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. "Allison was just showing me some calming images," he explained, "to help me distress." But I had seen the look on his face. It was the same look he'd had when he'd dreamed of the brewery. It was the look of a man planning a future. Allison began to adopt my life as if it were a costume she was trying on for size. I found her using my favorite ceramic mug one morning. When I pointed it out, she just smiled her serene smile and said, "Oh, is it? It has such a lovely, grounding weight to it." She started wearing a delicate vanilla-scented perfume, the same one I had worn for years until the chemo made me too sensitive to smells. It was a ghostly echo of me, a healthier, blonder, more energetic version. The final undeniable proof that I was being replaced came in the form of my mother's locket. It was a simple gold necklace she had given me, something I treasured. It had gone missing a few weeks prior. I had assumed I'd misplaced it in my chemo-addled state. I had turned my bedroom upside down looking for it. I asked Ethan about it, and he'd given me a vague, dismissive shrug. "It'll turn up, Em." One evening, Allison was helping me get ready for bed. As she leaned over to fluff my pillows, her blouse fell open slightly, and there, lying against her skin, was my mother's locket. The sight of it was like a punch to the gut. I felt the blood drain from my face. I couldn't breathe. "Where?" I choked out, my voice a strangled whisper. "Did you get that?" She instinctively touched the locket, a small, guilty movement, but her composure was flawless. She didn't miss a beat. "Oh, this?" she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Ethan gave it to me. He said he found it and thought it would suit me. A little gift to thank me for all my hard work." She smiled at me, a dazzling, triumphant smile. It was a declaration of victory. She wasn't just my caregiver. She wasn't just my husband's new friend. She was my replacement. And my husband had given her my mother's legacy as a welcome present. In that moment, I knew that this wasn't just about neglect or abandonment. This was a coup. A quiet, polite, holistic coup. And they thought I was too weak and sick to ever fight back. The chemo lounge had become a strange sort of sanctuary for me. It was the one place I could escape the oppressive atmosphere of my own home, the one place where I wasn't under Allison's serene, watchful eye. It was a place of quiet, shared suffering. We patients didn't talk much. but there was an understanding that passed between us in tired glances and small smiles. We were all soldiers in the same ugly war. That particular Tuesday, the war was not going well. The infusion felt more toxic than usual, the chemical cocktail dripping into my veins like a slow-acting poison. A wave of profound fatigue washed over me, so heavy it felt like I was being pulled down into the beige recliner. It was in this state of detached exhaustion that my phone buzzed with an email notification. I fumbled for it, my fingers feeling thick and clumsy. The email was from the oncology lab, a bill for a copay on some recent blood work. It was a trivial amount, $57.30, but it was a task, something to focus on other than the nausea churning in my stomach. I decided to pay it immediately, just to have it done. I opened my banking app, a routine I'd done 1,000 times. I navigated to my personal savings account, the account that held my mother's inheritance. It was my financial and psychological safety net. My mother, a fiercely independent woman who had been widowed young, had drilled one lesson into me above all others. Never be dependent, Emma. Have your own money. Have your own escape route? That account was my escape route. It held over $400,000, a lifetime of her careful saving and shrewd investing. It was the money that allowed me to sleep at night, knowing that whatever happened, I would land on my feet. The app loaded. I tapped on the savings account. The balance appeared on the screen, $214.15. The number didn't compute. My brain simply couldn't process it. It was like looking at a word in a foreign language. $214.15. It had to be a mistake. A system error. A temporary glitch. My heart started to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I took a shaky breath and refreshed the app. The number remained. $214.15. A cold dread, colder than the chemo in my veins, spread through my body. With a trembling finger, I tapped to view the transaction history. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning the screen so frantically I could barely read the words. And then I saw them. The outgoing transfers. They were like 3 daggers in a row. The first was from 5 weeks ago, dated August 12th. The amount was $50,000. I remembered that day. It was 2 days after Ethan had first proposed hiring Allison. He'd told me it would be an investment in my health. Apparently, he meant it literally. The second transfer was from 3 weeks ago. August 29th, $85,000. That was the week my hair had fallen out. The week I had begged him to come with me to the salon. The week he had slept on the couch because he couldn't stand to look at me. While I was at my absolute lowest, he had been draining my account. The third and final transfer was the one that shattered me. It was from just 6 days ago, September 16th. The amount was $346,720, the rest of it. All of it. He had emptied the account down to the last dregs. And next to each of these devastating debits was the same recipient name, Allison Monroe. The air in the chemo lounge suddenly felt thick and unbreathable. The quiet beeping of the IV machine sounded like a shrill alarm in my ears. The betrayal was so immense, so audacious, it was almost surreal. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a premeditated financial execution. They had a plan, a cold, methodical plan to strip me of every asset I had before I died. My mind, suddenly sharp and clear, started racing. I logged out of my savings account and into our joint checking account, the one used for bills and groceries. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type the password. The statement loaded, and I began to scroll, my stomach twisting into a tighter and tighter knot. I was no longer just a patient. I was a forensic accountant on the trail of my own ruin. The evidence was everywhere. It was a roadmap of their affair, paid for with my money. There were charges from high-end restaurants I had never been to, a receipt from a luxury hotel in the city for a weekend I had spent at home, sick from treatment. There were purchases from designer clothing stores, florists, and jewelers. He was wooing her, building a new life with her, using my mother's legacy as his personal slush fund. Then I found what I was looking for. A recurring monthly payment of $4,500 to a property management company. The memo line read, Lease, 1420 Lakefront Drive, Apt 6B. It was an address in a neighboring town, one known for its expensive, new condo developments. They had a home, their own home. The nurse came over then, her voice soft. Emma, your infusion is done. Are you feeling all right? You look very pale. I looked up at her, my face a blank mask. I couldn't begin to explain the poison that was truly coursing through my system. I'm fine, I said, my voice sounding distant and strange to my own ears. Just tired. She helped me disconnect the IV, her movements gentle. I walked out of the hospital like a zombie, my body on autopilot. I didn't call Ethan to pick me up. I called a taxi. And I gave the driver the address for Lakefront Drive. The ride felt like a dream. The city passed by in a blur of rain-streaked windows. All I could see were those numbers, that name, Allison Monroe. I arrived at a sleek modern building with glass balconies overlooking the water. It was the kind of place Ethan and I had once looked at years ago before deciding it was too extravagant. I paid the driver and got out, huddling across the street under the flimsy awning of a closed shop, the cold drizzle soaking through my coat. I only had to wait for about 15 minutes. A silver BMW I'd never seen before pulled into the private garage. A few moments later, Ethan and Allison emerged from the building's front entrance. He was holding an umbrella over both of them. They were laughing, their heads close together. He looked younger, happier, completely carefree. He looked like the man I had first fallen in love with, before I had become his project, his burden, and finally, his mark. Allison was wearing a stylish red coat, and she looked vibrant, healthy, and triumphant. He leaned down and kissed her, a deep, passionate kiss right there on the sidewalk. It wasn't a peck on the cheek. It was a lover's kiss. As she tilted her head back, the light from the street lamp caught the glint of gold at her throat. It was my mother's locket. Seeing that locket on her was somehow more violating than seeing the empty bank account. The money was tangible, but the locket was symbolic. It was my history, my mother's love, my inheritance of strength, and he had given it to her. He had taken the last precious piece of my mother from me and used it to adorn his mistress. In that moment, standing in the cold rain, all the grief and sadness inside me coalesced into something new. It was a diamond-hard point of rage. The shock was gone, replaced by a chilling clarity. They thought I was a dying woman. They had made their calculations based on my weakness. They had counted me out, and that was going to be their fatal mistake. I turned away before they could see me, my movements calm and deliberate. The fight for my life was no longer just against cancer. It was against them, and I would not lose. The taxi ride home was a study in controlled stillness. Outside, the rain-slicked streets reflected the blurry neon of the city, a world that seemed to be moving at a different speed from the one inside my head. My mind, which for months had been a foggy swamp of fear and fatigue, was now terrifyingly clear. The sight of my mother's locket on Allison's neck had been a defibrillator to my soul, shocking it back to life with a jolt of pure, cold fury. Grief was a luxury I could no longer afford. Weakness was a role I would have to perform. From this moment on, I was not a patient. I was a strategist. I walked into my house just before they returned. The air was thick with the lingering scent of Allison's vanilla perfume, a scent I now associated with theft. I didn't have much time. I went directly to my laptop, my movements swift and economical. My hands, which had been trembling with weakness in the Chemo lounge, were now perfectly steady. I was an accountant again, and I was about to conduct the most important audit of my life. I logged into my bank accounts, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. I started taking screenshots. Everything. The 3 massive transfers from my savings to Allison. I saved them as JPEGs, numbering them in chronological order. Then I went into our joint account. I meticulously screenshotted every single suspicious transaction from the last 3 months. The bill from the jeweler, the receipt from the designer boutique, the down payment on the BMW, the recurring lease payment for their love nest. I downloaded the full bank statements as PDFs. With each click, with each saved file, I felt a piece of my power returning. He had used the digital world to rob me, and I would use it to bury him. I created a new, anonymous email address, a string of random letters and numbers that could never be traced back to me. One by one, I attached the files and sent them to this new account. This was my insurance policy, a digital vault they couldn't touch. As the last file uploaded, I heard their car pull into the driveway. I quickly cleared my browser history, closed the laptop, and shuffled into the living room, arranging myself on the couch under a blanket. I composed my face into a mask of weary sickness. When they walked in, laughing about something they'd seen at the store, I was just a pathetic lump on the sofa, too weak to be of any consequence. "Oh, Emma, you're home," Ethan said, his cheerfulness grating on my raw nerves. "How was treatment?" "Long," I mumbled, letting my eyes flutter closed. "So tired. Poor thing," Allison cooed, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Let me make you some calming tea." I just nodded, playing my part. As she bustled around the kitchen, my kitchen, I watched them through slitted eyes. I was no longer a participant in this household. I was a ghost, a silent observer gathering intelligence from behind enemy lines. The next day, I made the most important call of my life. I waited until I knew they would be out for a few hours. Ethan had mentioned taking Allison for a relaxing hike, a phrase so absurdly offensive it fueled my resolve. I called Carol, my mother's best friend. Carol was a retired CPA who had done some fraud investigation work in her younger days. She was sharp, unsentimental, and fiercely loyal to my mother's memory. "Carol, it's Emma," I said when she answered, my voice a low whisper. "Emma, honey, how are you feeling?" Her voice boomed through the phone. "Not good," I said, and for the first time, I let the raw truth of it into my voice. "Carol, I need your help. I can't explain over the phone, but I'm in trouble. Ethan." I stopped, unable to say the words. There was a pause. "How bad is it?" Carol asked, her tone shifting from friendly to clinical. "He took the money, Carol. All of my mother's money. He gave it to another woman." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. "Okay," she said finally, her voice devoid of shock, only grim purpose. "Don't say another word. I'll be there in an hour. Does he have a routine?" "He and she, they go for a walk every day at 3. "Good," Carol said. "I'll be there at 3:15. Leave the back door unlocked." Carol arrived exactly as planned, a small, discreet toolbox in her hand. She was all business. She hugged me tightly, her embrace strong and reassuring, and then she got to work. "We need to see and hear what they're doing," she said, pulling a tiny device from her kit. It looked like a phone charger, the kind you plug into a wall outlet. "This is a camera and a microphone. It streams directly to a secure app on your phone. We'll put it in the hallway, across from the living room and his office. It should capture most of what we need." The 20 minutes she was in the house were the most stressful of my life. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like a gunshot. But Carol was calm and efficient. She plugged the device into a low outlet, adjusted the angle, and then showed me the app on my phone. Suddenly, a live feed of my own hallway appeared on the screen. It was shockingly clear. "Delete the app if you think he'll look at your phone and reinstall it later," she instructed. "And Emma," she said, her hands on my shoulders, her eyes boring into mine. "From now on, you are the weakest, sickest, most pathetic woman in the world. You understand? You let them get comfortable. You let them get arrogant. Arrogant people make mistakes. Living under my own surveillance was a surreal experience. I became two people. Outwardly, I was the fading patient, my movements slow, my voice frail. I would moan as I shifted on the couch. I'd let out small, weak coughs. I would ask Ethan to open a jar of pickles, then thank him profusely as if he had just performed a heroic feat. Inwardly, I was a hawk. I would lie on the couch, pretending to doze, while my phone was tucked under my blanket, streaming their lives, and the evidence I gathered was more damning than I could have imagined. They had gotten careless, convinced of their own brilliance and my imminent demise. One evening, I watched them on the camera feed. They were in the living room drinking wine, one of the expensive bottles I had paid for, while I was supposedly asleep in the bedroom. "Her latest scan is next week," Ethan said, his voice low. I could hear every word through my phone's earpiece. "I have a feeling it's not going to be good news." There was a cold, clinical detachment in his voice, as if he were discussing a failing stock. "It's taking so long," Allison sighed, swirling the wine in her glass. "I feel like we've been waiting forever." Then came the moment that would seal their fates. Allison leaned in, her voice a venomous hiss. "What are you waiting for, Ethan? For her to die naturally? We need to move on the other assets before she gets too sick to sign anything." I held my breath, waiting for him to defend me, to show a flicker of the man I thought I had married. But he just took a long sip of his wine. "I know," he said wearily. "I'll talk to her this week. I'll tell her we need to simplify the estate for tax purposes. She trusts me. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her." I saved the clip. I labeled it the estate plan. It was Exhibit AA. Few days later, the camera caught them looking at travel brochures. The Maldives. They were laughing, pointing at pictures of overwater bungalows. "As soon as the house sells, we're gone," Ethan said, kissing her. "A whole new life. No more sickness, no more hospitals." I saved that clip too. The Maldives plan. Exhibit B. Every day they handed me another nail for their own coffins. And I just kept smiling my weak, tired smile, hoarding their words, documenting their treachery. They thought they were in control. They had no idea that the dying woman on the couch was quietly, patiently, setting the stage for their complete and utter destruction. My life became a stage, and I was delivering the performance of a lifetime. Every morning, I would wake up and consciously put on the character of the dying Emma. It was exhausting. A constant battle between the rage that burned inside me and the frail, defeated woman I had to present to the world. My acting had to be flawless, because I knew they were watching me, assessing my decline like vultures circling a wounded animal. I let my appearance go completely. I stopped wearing the beautiful scarves Maria had helped me pick out, and instead wore plain drab beanies. I let my skin grow sallow, my eyes sunken. I would shuffle when I walked, my hand pressed against my back as if in pain. The cough I developed was a work of art, a dry, pathetic little rasp that I could produce on cue, especially when I knew they were listening. My weakness became my greatest weapon. It allowed me to be a passive observer in conversations that were breathtakingly incriminating. One afternoon, Ethan was on the phone with his brother. I was on the couch, pretending to be asleep. Because I was asleep, he didn't bother to lower his voice. "No, she's not good," he said, a note of performative sadness in his voice. "The doctors are saying it's just a matter of time." "Yeah, it's been so hard." "No, of course, I'm taking care of everything, making sure her affairs are in order. The last thing I want is for her to be worried about finances at a time like this." He was painting himself as the grieving, dutiful husband while simultaneously plotting to steal the rest of my assets. The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost beautiful in its ugliness. Allison, emboldened by my rapid decline, grew more openly disdainful. Her bedside manner, once cloyingly sweet, was now brisk and impatient. "Come on, Emma, just a few more sips," she'd say, holding a spoonful of broth to my lips, her voice tight with irritation when I'd turn my head away. She was no longer performing for Ethan. She was just a greedy heir-in-waiting, annoyed that the current owner was taking so long to vacate the premises. Her cruelty was a gift. It stoked the fire inside me, reminding me every day why I was doing this. She was so blinded by her own avarice that she couldn't see the woman she was tormenting was also the one taking meticulous notes. The moment Ethan had promised Allison finally arrived one rainy Thursday afternoon. He came into the bedroom where I was resting, a thin file folder in his hand. He sat on the edge of my bed, his weight making the mattress dip. He took my hand, his skin cool and dry. "Hey, sleepyhead," he said, his voice the gentle, condescending tone one uses with a child or an invalid. "Sorry to bother you, but there's a little bit of boring paperwork we need to take care of." He opened the folder. "It's just some stuff from our financial advisor," he said, his tone breezy and casual. With your condition, he said it's a good idea to streamline some of our joint assets. It's just for tax purposes. It makes things simpler down the line." He pulled out a sheaf of papers, already marked with little yellow sign here stickies. "It's nothing, really," he said, handing me a pen. "It just gives me the ability to manage our investments more easily, so you don't have to worry your pretty little head about it." I took the papers, my hands performing a convincing tremor. I feigned confusion, squinting at the dense legal text. "Oh, Ethan," I said, my voice a weak, breathy whisper. "It's all just so confusing. My head is so foggy today." "Don't worry," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "You don't need to read it. Just trust me. I'm taking care of you. I'll always take care of you." He pointed to the first signature line. It was a durable power of attorney form, a document that would give him absolute control over every aspect of my life, financial and medical. The second document was to add a secondary beneficiary to my life insurance policy. The primary was my sister, a blank line waiting to be filled with Allison's name. The third was an authorization to liquidate my remaining stock portfolio, the last asset that was solely in my name. It was the final heist, the clean-out job. I looked at him, my eyes wide and trusting. I let a single weak tear roll down my cheek. "You're such a good man, Ethan," I whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I brought the pen to the paper. His eyes were fixed on the tip, gleaming with anticipation. And then I let out a theatrical coughing fit, my whole body shaking. The pen clattered to the floor. "Oh dear," I gasped, pressing a hand to my chest. "I'm so sorry. I feel so weak all of a sudden. Can we do this later? Maybe after I've had a nap?" The flash of annoyance in his eyes was visible for only a second before he replaced it with a look of deep concern. Of course, my love," he said, stroking my hair. "You rest. We'll do it tonight. The important thing is for you to conserve your energy." He gathered the papers and left the room. The moment the door clicked shut, I was off the bed. I took out my phone and with steady hands, I photographed every single page of those documents. The images were crystal clear. I immediately emailed them to my new lawyer, a man Carol had recommended, with the subject line, Exhibit C. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense man named Mr. Davies, called me within 10 minutes. "Emma, I've reviewed the documents," he said, his voice grim. "This is blatant, premeditated fraud. The power of attorney, combined with the other forms, he's trying to liquidate everything you have left and give himself the legal authority to make medical decisions on your behalf. This is extremely dangerous. What do I do?" I asked, my voice low. You do nothing, he said firmly. You continue to be weak. You continue to be confused. Do not sign those papers under any circumstances. Stall him. Tell him you lost your reading glasses, that your hand is too sore, that you want to wait until after your next scan. Buy us time. We have almost everything we need to close the trap. We just need one more definitive piece of evidence of their intent. That night, Ethan brought the papers back. Allison hovered in the doorway, a vulture in a cashmere sweater. I gave them the performance of my life. I tried to sign, but my hand was too shaky. I squinted at the page and complained the print was too small. I told them I was feeling anxious and wanted to wait until the morning. With every excuse, I could see their frustration mounting, a barely concealed irritation behind their masks of loving care. They thought they were dealing with a dying fool. They had no idea they were dealing with a director who was letting them write their own final damning scene. The final piece of the puzzle, the definitive evidence my lawyer was waiting for, came 2 days later. My performance of the confused, dying wife had made them reckless. Their frustration was palpable. They felt their prize slipping away as I delayed signing the papers. They thought my body was failing, but they were worried my mind would fail to the point where my signature would no longer be legally valid. Their window of opportunity, they believed, was closing. This desperation made them sloppy. I was napping on the couch when Ethan took the call in the hallway, right in the camera's line of sight. He thought I was unconscious, but I was wide awake. My phone clutched under my blanket, the audio feed streaming directly into my earbud, which was hidden by my beanie. The call was to our financial advisor. David, hi. It's Ethan Collins, he said, his voice low and urgent. Listen, I have a quick question. In a hypothetical situation, what is the fastest way to liquidate joint assets if one of the partners is incapacitated? We're trying to get ahead of some estate issues. I could hear the tinny voice of the advisor on the other end, talking about legal requirements, death certificates, power of attorney. Ethan's impatience was audible in his replies. No, she's still here, he said, a note of irritation in his voice. I just want to know what the process is so we can be prepared. How quickly can we move the funds once the paperwork is signed? I recorded the entire conversation. It was the smoking gun. It showed clear, undeniable intent to seize control of our assets, predicated on my incapacitation. The very next evening, Allison delivered the nail that would seal her own coffin. She and Ethan were in the living room. They thought I'd taken a sleeping pill and was knocked out for the night. The camera recorded it all in perfect clarity. Allison was pacing, agitated. She refused to sign them again tonight, Ethan. She said she felt dizzy. We are running out of time, she snapped, her voice a harsh whisper. She's getting worse. Any day now, she could slip into a coma or lose her mind completely, and then all this will be for nothing. Soon, Ethan. Soon it will all be ours, but we have to push this through. I know, he said, trying to placate her. I'll try again in the morning. I'll tell her the bank requires it by the end of the week. I'll pressure her. I saved the clip. I sent both recordings to Mr. Davies with a simple 2-word email. We're ready. The next morning, my lawyer called me back. We have them, Emma, he said, and for the first time I heard a note of triumph in his voice. We have them on conspiracy to commit fraud, theft, and a possible charge of attempted elder abuse, given your medical state. The district attorney's office is very interested in this. They see it as a particularly predatory case. The plan is in motion. The court order to freeze all your joint and personal accounts will be executed at 11 a.m. The police will be dispatched to pick up Ms. Monroe at the apartment you paid for. I advise you to secure your home. What should I do? I asked. Change the locks. And be ready. They will not react well. At 10 a.m., I made a call to a 24-hour locksmith. As I was on the phone, Ethan and Allison came downstairs, dressed to go out. We're going to run some errands, Em, Ethan said, kissing my forehead. The gesture was so Judas-like it made my skin crawl. We can try those papers again when we get back, okay? Okay, I whispered, closing my eyes. The moment their car pulled out of the driveway, I was in motion. The locksmith arrived at 10:30. The sound of his drill biting into the wood of my front door was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my life being fortified, of the invaders being permanently locked out. He handed me the new set of keys, their sharp metal edges feeling solid and real in my hand. After he left, I took a piece of my best stationery, the thick, creamy paper I saved for important letters. I uncapped my favorite fountain pen. My handwriting, for so long shaky and weak, was now firm and steady. The anger and resolve that had been simmering for weeks flowed through the ink and onto the page. I wrote only 9 words, You thought I was weak. Now you'll feel the weight of my strength. I folded the note and taped it squarely in the middle of the front door, right at eye level. Then I went inside, locked the new deadbolt, and sat down on the chair in my living room that had a clear view of the front porch. And I waited. They returned at 12:30, carrying shopping bags from expensive stores, laughing together. The perfect couple. They walked up the steps, and I watched Ethan slide his old key into the lock. I saw his confusion when it didn't turn. He jiggled it, then tried again. A frown crossed his face. He looked at Allison and shrugged. Then he saw the note. He ripped it from the door and read it. The color drained from his face. I saw his mouth form my name, a silent, shocked Emma. He handed the note to Allison, who read it, her face contorting into a mask of pure fury. Then the banging started. Emma, what is this? Open the door, Ethan yelled, his voice a mixture of confusion and command. Allison started screaming, her voice a shrill, ugly sound. Open this door right now, you pathetic old hag. They beat on the door with their fists. They rattled the doorknob. They shouted my name, their voices escalating from anger to panic when they realized their keys didn't work, that their phones were going straight to my voicemail, that the world they had so carefully constructed had just evaporated. I didn't move. I just sat there in the quiet house listening to their impotent rage. I watched them through the window as they finally, utterly understood. They had been outmaneuvered. The weak, dying woman they had so casually written off had checkmated them. After 10 minutes of frantic, useless pounding, they finally gave up. They stood on my lawn, looking at the house in stunned disbelief, before finally getting in their car and speeding away. The silence that descended after they left was absolute. It was the silence of victory. The trap had closed. The immediate aftermath was a deluge of digital desperation. My phone, which I had placed on the coffee table in front of me, began to light up like a fire alarm. A storm of calls and texts from Ethan and Allison. First came the angry demands, typed in all caps. Then the threats. Then, as the reality of their situation began to dawn on them, the begging. Emma, please, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Call me, we can fix this. I watched the screen flash with their names, feeling a profound and chilling sense of detachment. The power to simply not answer, to let their pleas and threats echo into a digital void, was intoxicating. Each ignored call was a reclamation of a piece of myself they had tried to steal. Mr. Davies called me that afternoon. The accounts are frozen solid, he reported, his voice crisp. Ethan tried to make a large withdrawal an hour ago and was denied. The bank manager has been notified of the ongoing criminal investigation. As for Ms. Monroe, she was apprehended by police at the lakeside apartment. Apparently, she was in the middle of packing. She did not go quietly. The news of their arrest didn't bring me joy. It didn't bring a rush of victorious pleasure. It brought a quiet, grim sense of finality. It was like finishing a long, grueling, and disgusting job. You don't celebrate. You just feel relieved that you can finally wash your hands. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal procedures. Out on bail, Ethan launched a desperate and pathetic smear campaign. His family, who had once praised me as an angel, now took to social media to post vague, mournful messages about praying for Emma during this difficult mental health crisis and lamenting how illness can change a person. They were trying to paint me as a delusional, unstable woman, a cancer patient driven mad by her disease. I watched it all from a distance, feeling nothing. I had the truth on my side, and the truth was about to be presented in a court of law, not in the court of Facebook opinion. My only response was silence. The first day of the trial was terrifying. Walking into that courtroom, I felt small and exposed. But as I sat down and saw Ethan and Allison at the defendant's table, something shifted. They looked diminished, stripped of their arrogance. Ethan wouldn't meet my eye. Allison glared at me with pure, undiluted hatred. And I felt calm. When I was called to the witness stand, my voice was steady. I told my story simply and directly. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just stated the facts, one after another, building a wall of truth so solid they could never hope to breach it. But the real drama began when my lawyer started presenting the evidence. First, the bank statements projected onto a large screen for the entire courtroom to see. A timeline of my chemo treatments next to a timeline of their lavish spending. The jury was transfixed. Next came the photos of the fraudulent documents Ethan had tried to make me sign. The power of attorney form displayed like the weapon it was. The turning point was the audio and video recordings. Mr. Davies played the clip from the hidden camera first. The courtroom was silent as they all watched Ethan and Allison on the screen, sipping wine in my living room. Then Allison's voice filled the room, a venomous hiss. "What are you waiting for, Ethan? For her to die naturally?" A collective gasp went through the gallery. The jury members looked from the screen to Allison, their faces masks of disbelief and disgust. Then came the audio of Ethan's phone call to the financial advisor, his voice clear and cold as he asked about the fastest way to liquidate an incapacitated partner's assets. Ethan's lawyer had tried to argue that his client was a loving, if overwhelmed husband, who had been manipulated by a cunning predator in Allison, that he had only ever acted in my best interests. During the cross-examination, Ethan took the stand and sobbed, claiming Allison had twisted his words, that he was just trying to get organized in case the worst happened. The judge, a stern older woman with piercing eyes, listened patiently. Then, during sentencing, she addressed him directly. "Mr. Collins," she said, her voice cutting through the silent courtroom, "you have painted yourself as a man blinded by love and grief, a victim of a manipulative woman, but the evidence suggests something else entirely. It suggests a predator who saw his wife's illness not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity." She paused, looking down at the evidence file. "You didn't seem particularly manipulated when you were buying $900 bottles of wine with your wife's inheritance while she was undergoing chemotherapy." The sentence was swift. Ethan was found guilty of grand theft, fraud, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 3 years in state prison. Allison, for her role, received 2 years. As they were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, Ethan finally looked at me. His face was a mess of tears and disbelief. He looked like a child who couldn't understand why he was being punished. In his eyes, I saw no remorse, only the shock of having been caught. I walked out of the courtroom and into the bright afternoon sun. I didn't feel like a victor. I didn't feel like a victim. I just felt free. The weight I had been carrying for so long, the weight of his dreams, his debts, his betrayals, his crimes, was finally gone. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in over a year, the air didn't feel heavy. It just felt like air. The end of the trial was the end of a war, but the beginning of my own quiet reconstruction. The first milestone was my final chemotherapy session. As the nurse removed the IV from my arm for the last time, a small group of nurses who had been with me from the beginning gathered around and clapped. It was a small, simple gesture, but it meant the world to me. Their applause wasn't for a victim. It was for a fighter who had made it to the other side. 3 months later, a scan showed no evidence of disease. The cancer was gone. I had won my own battle, the one that truly mattered. With my health returning, I began to reclaim my life. The house, once a prison and a stage, slowly became a home again. I purged every last trace of them. I donated Ethan's clothes, sold the BMW, and threw out every bottle of Allison's holistic nonsense. One afternoon, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror. My hair had started to grow back, a soft, downy fuzz. It was patchy and uneven, a testament to the war my body had endured. I picked up a pair of scissors and with a steady hand I cut it all off, shaping it into a short, defiant style. The woman looking back at me was no longer the long-haired woman Ethan had married, nor the bald, sick patient he had abandoned. It was someone new. It was just me, Emma Collins, and I liked her. A week later, I walked into a tattoo parlor and had my mother's initial, a small, elegant C, tattooed on the inside of my wrist. It was a permanent reminder of where my true inheritance lay, not in a bank account, but in the strength she had passed down to me. Ethan lost everything. His appeals were denied. His family, shamed by the public nature of the trial, sold their home and moved away. Allison disappeared after her release, a ghost I would never have to see again. My lawyer was able to recover a portion of the stolen money from the sale of the apartment and other assets they had acquired. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. I sit in my quiet home now sometimes and think about it all. The anger is gone, replaced by a deep, calm peace. I realized that my revenge was not the prison sentences or the public humiliation. My revenge was my recovery. My revenge was sitting in my own living room, healthy and financially secure, sipping coffee from my favorite mug. My revenge was the simple, profound act of living, and living well. They thought my value was in what I could provide. They didn't understand that a person's real strength isn't what they can carry for others, but what they can survive themselves. I survived. Sometimes you don't need to set the fire. You just stop carrying the water. If you believe no one can steal the strength of a woman who refuses to give up, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.